Hello, everyone. Me again. I'm not going to stay on for long, but welcome to Financial Controls in an AI-enabled world. So very, very thrilled to have Gavin here with us today. So look, I'm not going to spend too much time. Just a reminder for everyone, this session will be recorded. We'll share it. Ask as many questions as you like. This is going to be around, 30 to 45 minutes. And then we've got our lunch break. So relax, Gavin. I'm going to hand over to you so you can start your screen sharing. Gavin comes from Eftsure. We do a lot of work with them. Great company. So very thrilled to have Gavin on here with us today. When you're ready, Gavin, you can take the floor.
Sure. I've lost some sort of control. Okay, you guys can. Okay, that's good. I assume you
Perfect.
can. Yeah, great. Okay,
You can see
brilliant.
it, can hear perfectly. You look great.
Well,
I'll
I don't
stop
know about that,
talking
but thanks, Adriana. Okay,
now.
it's great. It's great. It's great to be back at these fantastic wheel events. Yeah, with to talk about something obviously very prescient, very relevant at the moment. But before I go any further, there's a warning from me. And the first warning is I'm no AI expert. I think it's affecting every business. And like many of you are perhaps, we're learning our way into it. We're learning our way into it. And we're on a journey, and we're just going to share some of the things we found on that journey. And then secondly, to that end, I need to thank some people who I've borrowed and stolen from. The first is Jason Ross. He's the co-founder of a fantastic business headquartered here in Sydney called Time Under Tension. They're a group of people from Accenture who left, and they've formed a consultancy that's really focused on how AI tools can drive growth. And I would encourage you to reach out to them. And then a lot of my thinking that I'll share with you has been predominantly formed, although there's obviously lots of other sources, by two pieces of, let's say, research or points of view. The one is the AI Dilemma by Tristan Harris and Azza Raskin. I would encourage you to search for that. And then Mark Andreessen, who's really, for those of us old enough, will remember he invented the first internet browser, Mosaic, which became Netscape. He's certainly a luminary in technology and venture capital, and he's got strong points of view on this. And I'd encourage you to investigate those things on the web. This isn't our first time at a wheel event, and if you've attended these before, you'll know that we've been speaking over the past about cybercrime. We've been speaking about scams and frauds, which is our business and how it might affect you. We've looked at case studies. More recently, we looked at how data breaches can affect scams and frauds, and we've spoken about what to do about it. But I think it would be of no service to anyone if we just keep speaking about those things ad nauseum, especially in light of, a change, like a sort of an acceleration of change, certainly over the past year and 18 months. And there's been like sort of two streams of change around technology. There are more, but the two that have impacted certainly our world and our business as financial leaders and people protecting financial assets is AI. You can't sort of open a magazine or click on a link or scroll your social media feed without someone talking about it, worrying about it, or promising you something about it. And then kind of in parallel with that, not quite in response to it, but in parallel with that, when it comes to finances and protecting, or let's say the realm of financial leadership, there's been a lot of news and events from about what government's doing, about what the banks are doing, not in response to AI per se, which I think will emerge over the next few months, but more just in response to rising cybercrime and frauds. And that really shapes my talk today, which is I'm going to spend most of the talk looking at what we do know about, which is scams, frauds, which are targeting, your business as financial leaders, but how AI shifts the landscape on those things. And then to pick up that other trend we've been seeing, I'm going to talk about what government's doing, Okay, and then I'm going to highlight some discussions around ransomware and e-invoicing, because those seem quite loud, certainly to our ears. And then I'm going to look at what the banks are doing, and then kind of conclude somewhat in terms of what does this mean going forward for all of us. This topic, both in terms of AI and how it's impacting scams and frauds, but so too in terms of how we might respond to it, is a bit like drinking from a fire hose, to use that analogy. Sometimes you just want a glass of water and someone sort of throws a bucket in your face. And I'm mindful of doing that. So in response to that, what I'd say to you is, I'm going to open some doors. There are a lot of topics being covered. I'm going to open a few doors, and you choose which doors you want to walk further through. Or maybe, as I like to say, it's a bit like a supermarket. You don't need to buy everything that's on the shelf. Take one or two goods, put them in your basket, and leave the rest of the stuff. If it doesn't connect with you or you're disinterested, leave it on the shelf. So hopefully just opening some doors for you. And I'm really at risk of mixing all my metaphors. So let's start with, a primer on AI and what it means for the world of scams and frauds. So as I've learned my way into this, AI is really a broad topic, and how I've described it to myself, and I describe it to all of you, is it's a quest for a more human-like intelligence from systems and machines. That's my take on it. It's a quest for a more human-like intelligence on systems and machines. Within that, there's a subfield of AI called machine learning. And that's one way of achieving that human-like intelligence. The difference from a pre-machine learning model or a pre-machine learning way of getting something out of a computer system or software is that it requires specific programming for each instruction, whereas machine learning requires a bit less programming. It doesn't require constant supervision, and it can fundamentally make predictions from the data you give it without giving it specific instructions. Within that world of machine learning is something called deep learning. Now this is similar to machine learning, but they advanced the way the predictions were made, and they started basing the computer programming and the systems and the software more around how the human brain works, which, of course, is a topic unto itself. But the net result is deep learning systems don't require as much supervision and programming and instruction as general machine learning systems. And then you get into this world of generative AI, which is, in the purposes of my neat little diagram, it's a subset of deep learning, but in reality, it's a bit more like a sister or sibling to it. There's some overlap, but it really is a form of deep learning, where the difference between generative AI and deep learning is that not only can generative AI make predictions, but it can create new content from existing content. So it can create new outputs, new ideas, new imagery, new video, new content, for lack of a better term. Now, obviously, AI has been, being developed and researched for a long time, probably, several decades, but suddenly we've had this explosion of capability, and we've had this explosion of accessible products. And the question is why? Why did this happen now? And as I understand it, before 2017, about 5 years ago, all the research and development on AI was happening in discrete areas. There was development, be it academic or commercial, into how computers see, how computers speak, speech synthesis, how they hear, what music they generate, what images they can recognize, and what automation they create in terms of robotics. But then there was this kind of watershed or epochal kind of moment in 2017 where researchers in these discrete fields realized that all of AI exploration, development, research, it has a common ground in terms of all these things can be interpreted as language, and the language of maths and just language, right? And then there was a computer program that was created to common base all these different fields, and it's called I think it's called a transformer program. So regardless of whether you were researching music and notes, or pixels and images, or speech and sounds, you could base it all in a common language of, I guess, maths. And therefore, development in one area started sort of amplifying or propelling developments in other areas. The text of the internet is clearly language. We know that. But images and video are also language, okay? And this is a good moment for me to kind of explain what I mean by that, and some of you might be familiar with this. So if you take any image, right? Any image is made up of pixels, and each pixel has got two aspects to it. The one aspect of it's got a location, an X and a Y. It's got a location in the image. The other aspect is it's got a color. Now, all color is made up of red, green, and blue, RG and B, which is a term that might be familiar to us, and all of red, all of green, or each of red, each of green, each of blue can have a value from 0 through to 255. So, for example, white is 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue, and black right at the other end is 250 red, it's 255 red, 255 green, and 255 blue. And any combination of the values of red, green, and blue would make up the various colors. So now if I know the X and the Y location, and I know the combinations of red, green, and blue, I can describe any image in a combination of 5 numbers multiplied by the number of pixels, right? And if I fail to explain that really well, the net takeout is that any image and video can be explained through numbers and maths. And sound and music similarly, MRI scans similarly, computer code obviously, and financial information clearly, and radio waves. And I'm sure there are more examples of that. But once we had common ground for this, any one progress in artificial intelligence no longer was discrete to a specific field. And from 2017 till let's say now, and certainly the launch of things like ChatGPT last year, it exploded. Okay. And I'm going to pick 2 examples to show how advanced AI is becoming, and with an asterisk to say that these examples are already 3 to 4 to 5 months old. Okay. So they got someone to look at an image of an animal. Okay. And as this person was looking at images of an animal, it produces activity in the brain, that can be captured through an MRI machine. And then they fed the MRI images into an AI tool, and the AI tool could reproduce the image of the animal with not exactly, and in fact, I think in the research it was a giraffe, not a lion, but I'm using a lion here, to let's say 80 to 90% accuracy of that giraffe, of this lion. Okay. Just to restate what I'm saying, the AI only could absorb the MRI images, and it could reproduce what the person had seen when that person's brain was producing MRI images. So that's kind of quite cutting edge. Another example is they got some people to move around a room, and they monitored those people with 2 devices, a camera, a webcam, and an internet router, a Wi-Fi router. And they plugged those things into an AI program, software. Then what they did was they turned the camera off. But based on the radio wave changes as people moved around the room, the AI could keep mapping exactly where people were in the room. Okay. And those are just 2 examples of the immense capability. And I think those are a few months old. And every day, every week, every month sort of produces more progress in AI. This is just some very basic charts on the capabilities of, I think it wasn't ChatGPT, it was Google's tool called Bard. And what I'd turn your attention to is the last chart on the right, where they were training this tool on language, on answering questions in English. But then the AI tool started answering questions in Persian, but they never taught it Persian. So you get these kind of quite nerve-wracking leaps of capability as these tools and software learn. I'm also going to take a quick step to the side to say AI tools need to be trained, and they need to give given parameters. Trained is the content you give them to learn from and absorb. And then the parameters, as you'd expect, are ethical parameters, regulatory parameters. What data must they not ingest? What results should they never produce? It does need guardrails, and I'll come back to that point. And then, we experienced this explosion of AI capability and let's say accessibility largely through things like ChatGPT. It launched it launched, I think, at the end of last year, and by 1 July, it had 100 million users, and I'm sure it's gone way past that now. So that's ChatGPT. I'm sure many of you have used it or played around with it or done your kids' school homework on it, or is that just that could just be me? And then, ChatGPT has a sister tool called DALL-E. And then there are just a plethora of other AI tools that are just totally accessible, like any other software you're currently using. Synthesia, you can build like artificial sort of assistants, both video and voice assistants. There's companies like Poly AI doing call center bots, for lack of a better term, with really human capabilities. Some of you might know tools like Grammarly. They're injecting AI into those tools. And without a doubt, and I will say this, this is not our first blush with AI. AI or forms of AI are exactly why Facebook and Instagram and whatever tools you're using or have been using both personally or professionally feeds you exactly what you think, what it thinks you want, and what does appear to be what you want. So this is not our first blush with AI. I don't know how well this first blush, being social media, did go, but nevertheless, these tools arguably are going to do a huge amount for good. For in the NFP space, I know there's some interesting startups, including some in Australia, that are using AI to improve fundraising capabilities for your organizations, and that's just one example of many. If we zoom out and go a bit more macro, healthcare can improve, disaster management, conservation, education, general social services and welfare, in the commerce business end of things, automation, customer support. I could just keep going with the good AI can do, and I don't want to sort of sidestep how positive this might well be for mankind and progress. As the ATO certainly thinks so, and I mean, we could debate if this is a good or a bad thing, but they're already using the ATI to close tax loopholes. But Mark Andreessen, who I mentioned earlier, and I will come back to him, he says, he says as a shout to alarmists who think it could be really bad and have lots of downside consequences, AI. He says, think of AI more of a puppy than a person. But my response to Mr. Andreessen is, you get puppies and you get puppies. Okay, and it depends on how you train them, what content you put into them, and what ethical parameters they're trained on. And I mentioned ethical parameters, but some might be data collection and usage, fairness and bias mitigation, transparency and explainability to who's ever using it, and how they got to answers, things around privacy and legal compliance and so forth. Those are things. But one set of parameters and content produces the puppy on the left, and the other one produces the puppy on the right. And there are certainly downside consequences. Those researchers I mentioned, Tristan Harrison, Azarasking, they were so bold to say that the next American general election, being next year, could be the last human election, was their quote, which is obviously very concerning. It's already displacing jobs. And I think, machines and software and technology has been replacing a certain level of work. And maybe for all of us on this call, we just see the economic benefits or efficiency in that. Or sorry, I understand why some might, but it can also replace all our work. And the capability has changed. It can certainly destroy, exaggerate privacy. If you go back to that example I gave of AI being plugged into the web camera, I mean, ChatGPT cannot hack into your home routers yet, but at some point it could or might. And then lastly, it can supercharge crime, which is the sort of Eftsure expertise end of things, and supercharge scams and frauds. And I mean, I grew up on these movies. Perhaps some of them you do, the Terminator-esque dystopian movies of the future. But long before we get to some sort of apocalyptic vision of the future, AI is and can certainly supercharge the scams and frauds, which target the finance teams that all of you are in charge of, and which my business hopes to protect. And that brings me sort of to the next part of my talk, which is, how does AI, that was kind of big picture, but if we click in a bit, or, how is AI affecting the world of scams, frauds, and that aspect of cybercrime. And I think the general thesis, before I go deeper, is the scams and frauds which are targeting finance teams, AP teams, the ones that Eftsure stop and the ones that we have sort of domain expertise in. We always say they're called social engineering because they're more about social manipulation than technological advancement. What AI does is increase identity theft, the capabilities of fraudsters to do that, drives up the ability to impersonate people, and makes those scams more effective. And it can do this in the most basic ways. So what you can see on your screen is a phishing email. This is a real phishing email that we picked up, was sent to me. And fraudsters are often working in English as a second language. Okay, so in the recent past, we've always been able, you could pick up scams and frauds because of little basic errors in language. ChatGPT, as it stands now, or as it stood for the last 6 months, could easily eliminate that. But ChatGPT can also be used to to create programs that have nefarious intent. So what you can see on your screen is a post I found where a cybersecurity company, they're flagging that they saw a hacker post how they had used ChatGPT to create a fetching program, a stealer program it's called. And what that stealer program does is it can, if it's inserted off a click on a malicious email or a phishing email, if it's inserted into your system, it'll grab all your Microsoft Office and PDF documents as you create them or as they exist on your system and just ship them off to a fraudster. And they use ChatGPT to create that program, okay? Here's me using ChatGPT. I know nothing about computer programming, and you might have seen me talk about this before for a few months, but this is me using ChatGPT to basically write a little script that can fetch people's details from websites, okay? And here you can see ChatGPT taking a whole 5 seconds or 1 minute to do it. Because, as I said earlier, computer code is also language, and ChatGPT is a language-based AI tool. So you can, of course, use it to do code. And no sooner has something been created for good, like ChatGPT, but you get this mirror experience where something is created for bad. So there's a tool called WormGPT. It's like the evil twin to ChatGPT. It's been trained differently on different content. It's given less ethical parameters, and so it can be used by hackers or cyber criminals, to do nastier things. Voice impersonation. AI will help with voice. As we stand now, AI just needs about that much time, 3 seconds, to impersonate my voice. And scammers are already using voice impersonation. And I'm going to come back to this right at the end, but there was a scam being run in Washington in March this year, where elderly people were being phoned by what they thought was their grandson or I think it was a grandson, saying that grandson had been, caught up in some sort of misdemeanor and they were in jail, and could the grandparents come and bail them out of jail? And the bail was $3,000. And they got a call from who they thought and sounded like was their grandson. So what these elderly couple did was they ran around using their ATM card to withdraw from the ATM machine. When they hit their limit, they went into the bank. And I'm going to come back to the end of that story at the end of my talk. So that's already being used. And then this came across my desk just about 7-8 weeks ago. The University of Surrey did this experiment where they used an AI tool to listen to keyboard strokes through a Zoom meeting. All of us, maybe some of you are busy typing, doing some work now while you're listening to me. We all type while we're, on meetings. And this AI tool, very basic AI tool, could just listen to the keystrokes through a Zoom meeting and predict with 93% accuracy what was being typed. Now, that's a very easy, good way to get login credentials into a system. And then, of course, there's the world of video, which we've spoken about before and you would have seen in the media. So on the left is Martin Lewis. He's the UK's, as I understand it, the UK's kind of barefoot investor, the consumer finance expert. And on the left is the real Martin Lewis.
You're just on the cusp of trying, and it's actually an important question at the moment because there is an urgent.
So I'm not sure if you could hear that, but maybe you heard his voice. That was real Martin Lewis. And now you're hearing fake Martin Lewis, who's clearly not spruiking fake investment scam for Elon Musk. But that scam was published widely in the UK because he's such a well-known figure. The UK government was alarmed at how far AI video fakery had progressed, and started looking at legislation around this. So and we're right at the beginning of technologies like that. So where do we go from here? Like, what's at stake, and what are the risks? And in terms of how we should respond to this, I'm gonna start just really broadly, and I do hold both views, and I'm still making up my own mind that, is this a force for good, or is it a force for bad? And I think it can be both, depending on our actions over the next few years, and what action should we take. So I know this is quite a dramatic slide, but when you have something that has potentially huge destructive power, as we did with the nuclear bomb, and from the 40s onwards, it had to, how did we control nuclear risk and proliferation? Because after all, despite all the fears in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the last half of the 20th century, only 9 countries, here we're some 70 something years later since the Trinity test in the early 40s, only 9 countries have nuclear power. And unfortunately, since World War II, no nuclear weapons have been used. And how was that proliferation managed? Well, collaboration, coordination, and arguably control. So those are the tenets for how perhaps we should respond to AI. Now, the last one is contentious, because many smart people believe that what starts out with good intent around control and government control ends up in very bad places, in more fascist, exaggerated places of command and control. And one of those people who's concerned about that is Mark Andreessen, who I mentioned earlier. And he feels concerns around AI are exaggerated. He's written a paper that I'd encourage you all to read called Why AI Will Save the World. I think in the early noughties, he wrote a very famous paper called Why Software Will Eat the World. So the kind of intonation of this paper echoes that. He is an extremely smart person. You could also listen to him being interviewed on one or several podcasts. And his view is a positive one. It's an optimistic one, and it has equal, if not more validity than the other one. But he argues against control. He absolutely argues against control. So even if I import some of his views and say too much control of AI is bad, or the genie's out of the bottle already, so what's the point? I think there's an argument that speaks to collaboration and coordination that I will revisit. So, what is happening, not so much in response directly to AI, although that is starting to, but what I'm going to talk more about is what are the governments and the banks doing in response to scams and frauds that are being empowered or amplified by AI. And I'm going to step through like a kind of a beginner's guide, certainly as I learned myself on what's happening in those two spheres. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's been significant government response over the past few months. Again, some of it's in pertain to cybercrime, some of it's in pertain to scams and frauds, and all of those things are being powered by AI. But I think you'll see more specific response and legislation around AI coming up. So what's the government done over the past couple of months? Well, the first thing they did was elevate cybersecurity to the cabinet. As I think Claire O'Neill said, the Honorary Claire O'Neill, who's now the Minister of Home Affairs and Cybersecurity, she said in camera, everyone talks about cybersecurity, but no one owns it, or something to that effect. I might be misquoting her. And, she's calling out some truths, which is she feels, and especially in light of all these data breaches last year at Optus, Medibank, and Latitude Financial, and there were in fact 853 data breaches in Australia last year where private consumer information was lost, and 853 data breaches were reported to the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. There are probably more data breaches than that, but she says we're too vulnerable. Obviously, she's not just talking about the commercial sense. She's talking about in terms of national infrastructure and so on. And she has a vision, and her vision is to make us the most secure country by 2030. So, it's one thing to have a vision. You need a plan. The last time I checked, which was quite recently, that we're developing a new cybersecurity strategy. There is one in place, but obviously it needs to be updated. And I think they're inviting responses and contributions to that plan. The next thing Claire O'Neill did was appoint a national cyber defense coordinator. Now, you need coordination, much like a non-digital disaster, whether it's a flood or a fire or an earthquake. Coordination is a huge component of how you respond and how you sort of ameliorate risk and negative impacts. And so they've appointed Darren Goldie. He's a military officer, he's an air marshal, and his job twofold: to ensure critical infrastructure is well protected, but also to make sure that in the event of breaches or cybersecurity failures, that coordination is absolutely critical, absolutely quickly. Okay. Following that, the actual legislation and governing the sort of cybersecurity practices, technology and responsiveness and reporting requirements around 11 critical industries: transport, water, sewage, communications, data, so on. That's been upgraded. Okay. This is one I've got less fact on, but the government is taking a more aggressive posture in response. Previously, as I understand it, our posture nationally was, we are going to defend ourselves from being attacked. But if we get attacked, now what we're saying is we will respond. We will respond and try, root out and attack the attackers. I don't know what that means practically, but it's certainly an intent. The next thing that's happening, which gets closer to our world as commercial businesses or not-for-profits, is, the onus on us to protect consumer information and privacy. And those legislations are being strengthened. The demands on businesses are being strengthened. That is certainly a direct response to some of these very unfortunate breaches that have happened. The funding of the national, funding, I think $56 million has been provided in the last budget to create a national anti-scam center. 44 million of that will go to building better communication databases around scams for people like the ACCC or organizations like the ACCC who can disseminate information more quickly. And then some other things the government's done is they've got a strong intent, it's not legislation yet, to ban ransomware payments. They're promoting e-invoicing through the ATO that I'll talk about. And then there's more pressure on the banks to be more active in stopping scams and frauds. But I'm going to speak about those things separately. So ransomware. This is, the eternal question in cybersecurity is, to pay or not to pay. And there are arguments for both. The government's argument is really that they think it should be banned. It's, as I said, not legislation yet, but there's a strong mandate or demand on businesses to not pay, because they feel by paying ransom, you are supporting the business model of cyber criminals. That if they know we're going to pay, they'll keep doing it, obviously. On the other hand, there is a counter view that's twofold. Surely there needs to be a case-by-case sort of assessment, because what if a business, what if not paying a ransom impacts the physical well-being of people? It's a hospital, it's a medical company. I mean, I think the CEO of Medibank, and I am open to correction, he didn't pay, but he at the same time feels that the government shouldn't determine whether he should pay or not. I might be open to correction on that, but that's as I recall. And similarly, I could make a slightly contentious argument that goes, because cyber criminal organizations are commercial and they do have a business model, when you pay, you might well get your information back, because if they don't give it back to you exclusively, then they're damaging their own business model anyway. But where I land on this is, I think there can be guidelines, but they shouldn't be absolute. There must be some case-by-case establishment. Then e-invoicing. Some of you might have got information or explored this in your own area. I know a lot of public sector organizations, councils, local government, state government, they're getting a lot of communication from the ATO about shifting to e-invoicing. E-invoicing is a good thing. Perhaps many of you know it, but for some of you that might be not that across it, e-invoicing is really the digitization of the billing process. So instead of someone issuing you with a PDF invoice that you then enter into your ERP or accounting software, if you and your vendors are in an e-invoicing environment or ecosystem, they will enter their invoice information in their system, and it'll emerge in your system. And that's a good thing. It creates speed. It does add a certain aspect of security. This is how it helps. It removes the whole vulnerability of how PDFs can be intercepted or email can be intercepted and corrupted, so that you end up paying fraudsters. It removes that fraud vector, but I wouldn't overestimate what it can do for scams and frauds, because that information still has to be entered in your vendor's system and emerge in yours. So where is that information being sourced by your vendor? They might still take it off an email. So there's a whole sort of chain of coherence that needs to be created for this to be effective. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing, but I wouldn't overestimate the security it provides. And then the last thing I said was that the government has definitely driven up pressure, or lobbying groups have driven up pressure on the banks to do more, and I think that's justified. But before I talk about the banks, this did sort of pop up very recently, which is the US government is really starting to bring awareness, concern, and requirements around AI into their legislation. One of the first evidences I've seen of that is this is a document which was sent by the director of the Office of Science and Technology at the White House to various agencies, that says when you're doing your budgeting process, you need to consider how AI can impact your agency for good, but also in line with the intent of the country, and be mindful if you're asking for budget for AI tools that you do it in a way that's coherent with that, and be mindful of some of the risks. So that's the first step, and I'm sure you will see in Australia that there's more definitive legislation and acknowledgement of the AI impact. So then the last thing I said the government's doing is putting pressure on the banks, and this brings me into sort of a conversation around the banks. And as we stand today, the banks do not carry liability for making the wrong payment under your instruction. They say, and if you've heard me speak at events by wheel or at conferences, you'll know we've been banging this drum for a long time, and it's very integral to the formation of our business at Eftsure. But the banks do not carry liability for making the wrong payment, because they say when you push pay, approve, or authorize, you're responsible. You're the authorizer. In the UK, they call many of these scams and frauds, which happen through the bank payments, authorized push payment fraud, because you're authorized, you're authorizer, you're pushing the payment. So they don't carry liability. And there might be movements to get them to, but it's yet to be seen whether that will actually transpire. So what is happening? If they're not carrying liability, what moves are the banks making? What is happening in the world of banking? And you might have heard this term NPP, which stands for New Payments Platform. And I'm going to talk about that because we often have CFOs or financial leaders say to us at Eftsure, but won't NPP solve the problem of scams and frauds and that aspect of cybercrime? And it won't quite. And that's because the New Payments Platform is not fundamentally around security or control. It's a modernization of Australia's banking infrastructure, predominantly for ease and predominantly for speed. Now, it does have a component called PayID that perhaps you're using or familiar with, but I'm going to talk about PayID separately because it's auxiliary to the intent and power of NPP. The power of NPP is really around speed and flexibility around movement of bank accounts and bank information. So how it helps scams and fraud is, speed is good, and PayID can help, certainly in the consumer retail space. And things like NPP will allow for better user experiences of banking-related platforms or bank platforms themselves. But it's fundamentally, PayID is very limited in its ability to actually provide security for you when you're paying people. And in fact, if it creates a perception of security but not actually delivering security, then we've got false security and we've got a problem. So I'll come back to PayID, but the NPP in and of itself does not solve the problem of payment scams, frauds, and that aspect of cybercrime. Does open banking? Well, again, not quite. So sorry, a lot on the slide, but what is open banking? Open banking is actually not so much about technology, it's about consumer data rights. Open banking says that we as individuals can give permission to the bank to provide our information to a third party. often a financial technology business building a tool, creating convenience, and all of, and that's fine. And open banking is quite good from the point of view of it can stimulate innovation. It can create more tools for analysis and general innovation in finance. But it's not great for financial control, especially in terms of verification or determining the legitimacy and veracity of who you're paying. Like, are you paying the right people? It's quite limited in that aspect. Firstly, because it's a consumer data right. So let's say fintech came to you and said, we're going to use open banking to ensure that you always, that your payments are safe. Well, that would involve getting permission from your vendors. Those vendors or suppliers would have to give that fintech permission so that they could log in to their bank details through that fintech platform. But after 9 months, that permission expires. Okay, that permission expires. So it's a temporal solution. Lastly, it's all based on access to bank information. But what we found is a lot of bank information is quite antiquated and outdated. And to what extent do the banks actually share information with each other? So it's limited. I'm going to return to PayID because this does help with security. And it is linked to the NPP, as I said earlier. It's the simplistic nickname addressing system. So instead of paying to a BSBN account number, you pay to an ABN, let's say, or more likely a mobile number. And that certainly can help a bit with security, but only to a limited aspect. Firstly, PayID is working really more for individuals rather than businesses. It can't handle batch payments yet. It would need total ecosystem adoption from accounting software to all your vendors, to all businesses to register PayIDs. But here's the point. Even if all that happens and systems and your entire trading partner community gives you PayIDs and you can, absorb those into your accounting software and all of that, it can still be impersonated. So let's say I wanted to trick you to paying the wrong PayID. And sorry, if I go back a bit, what does a PayID do? If you pay someone to a PayID, it returns the name. That's how it helps with security. I kind of skipped over that, sorry. But if you pay me to using PayID, when you put in, let's say, my mobile number, it might say back to you, this PayID belongs to Gavin Levinsohn. Okay, so it does add a layer of checking. But if I wanted to defeat PayID, all I would do is I would register a business similar to the business I want to impersonate. So if I wanted to impersonate Officeworks, I simply have to go register a business called Officeworks, spelled a bit differently, or Officeworks Partners, and register, let's say, register that business, then come to you and say, please pay me to my PayID, which is my ABN, but now I've got my own ABN to a similar sounding name. You then, if you paid me through PayID, when you put in that ABN in my PayID, a name similar to Officeworks would come up, but it's the one me as the fraudster registered. So it can quite easily be defeated. So it helps. The banks are pushing further than PayID. So CBA is one bank that's quite innovative, and they've got a thing called name check. Again, a step in the right direction, but it's also limited because what name check does is it says this appears to be, or it looks like, or it's similar to the account you're trying to pay. Now, if I was a CFO, I can't work with ambiguity. I can't work with maybe or kind of or similar to. So there's certainly limitations there. What we've seen in the UK, where they have a mandate from government called confirmation of payee, which says to all the banks you have to check and provide some sort of alert to the payer. What we've seen is because it's come in the UK with contingent liability for the banks match very aggressively and they tend to overcorrect. They don't pick up things like trading name changes because the information they have is only at account setup. So if a business was set up 10 years ago with called AB Partners, but now the name that's in your vendor master file because they've adjusted their name is AB Incorporated, the bank would give you a big no, like a X or a red thumb, and you wouldn't pay and you'd have to stop your payment file. So there are all sorts of problems with solutions like name check, but they work towards the right thing. So, where to from here? And I think big picture, I'll go back to the point that you need collaboration, you need coordination, and it's debatable how much control should actually be applied, or regulation should be applied to this emerging area of AI. And at Eftsure, we've been talking about collaboration for years. And I'm going to just hark back to some things we've said to make it more practical. Whether you're fending off scams and frauds, or you're fending off scams and frauds empowered by AI, you need better collaboration within your organization. We've been talking for ages about having not a cybersecurity strategy, but a cyber crime strategy. And what we mean by that is connecting financial leadership with technology leadership, and it produces a strategy that has kind of 5 tenets: training, culture, internal controls, pressure testing systems, and technology. And I'm not going to speak about those things because we have in the past. You might have heard it, and you can always follow up with us or me, and we can talk about those things. Bigger picture, I think, if we zoom out a bit, your business, we need to keep abreast of what the government's doing. We need to keep abreast of what the banks are doing, and in collaboration with your own efforts and controls. And some of those might also be the implementation of AI software in your own business or through your vendors to combat some of these AI risks. So just to be really simple about it, I gave that example of, where the University of Surrey had used AI to detect keystrokes during a Zoom meeting. Well, I'm sure it's just a matter of time before Zoom use AI to block that kind of intrusion. So every software vendor is looking at AI as a means to improve what they do. So you need to keep abreast of that. But fundamentally, I think we need just greater coordination between individual businesses, private sector, what the government's doing, and what the banks are doing to mitigate risk. In terms of where Eftsure fits in, I mentioned earlier on that, and I'm just, 1 or 2 more slides here, but I mentioned earlier on about that scam where the elderly people were called by who they thought was their grandchild. And sorry, team at Wheel, I know I'm at 45 minutes. I'm going to stop in 1 minute. Don't worry. But they that elderly couple was running around to ATMs trying to withdraw money to pay for their grandson's alleged bail. The scam stopped when they hit the limit of the ATM and went into the bank and went to the bank manager and said, I need extra money. And the bank manager said to him, I'm not giving you the money, you're being scammed. And the bank manager knew they were being scammed because why? Because several other elderly couples had also come in claiming they needed to withdraw more funds to bail their grandchildren out of jail. Okay. So what happened there? Because the bank manager has a wider view, because the bank manager could see the community, not the individual, he knew a scam was at play. And that's a principle, a kind of a safety in numbers principle that Eftsure has been using for the past 10 years as our founding principle for how to stop scams and frauds. So we've got about 1,850 customers in every sector of the economy, including your own. But customers are not our customers. They're also members of a community. And what I mean by that is, as we've added customers, we verify all their vendors. And because lots of businesses and organizations pay similar businesses, we can cross-match all that data, create a safety in numbers approach, and verify businesses through this communal approach to cybersecurity. So collaboration, coordination, and control, ? Is my message. That's going to be the future of how we mitigate risk of AI. Thank you for your time today, and I hope you got some value. I'm going to hand back to the Wheel team to see if there are any questions.
Hi there, Gavin. Thank you so much. Yeah, there have been a few questions. One that's come through a lot, so good feedback, Gavin. Everyone's loved it. So would love some recordings. But we will share the recording, absolutely. Patrick asked, I don't know if you got this before, but it said, how about banks that do not have multi-factor authentication on accessing an account? Who is liable?
At the moment in Australia, that's a good question. I don't know the specific answer. I'll say, because my assumption, a bit embarrassingly, is they've all got MFA to log in. To my understanding, if they don't, they still don't carry liability. The banks simply, when you hit pay, approve, or authorize, the liability is on you. You're the authorizer. That's my understanding. Now, I don't know who Patrick banks with, sometimes you can lean on the bank to remediate funds lost, and sometimes they will, but they don't owe it to you. So I am open to correction because it's a nuanced question around 2FA, but I'm pretty confident saying there is no version in Australia where the bank carries liability for misdirected payment, regardless of whether you use 2FA or not, or multi-factor authentication.
Is it privacy data once a scammer accesses a client account? Oh, sorry, it's a statement. It is the privacy data once a scammer accesses a client account.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm not sure on the question from
yeah. Patrick, perhaps
but,
you can reframe that one.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you very much, everyone. We'll send out a recording. Yes, absolutely. It is a great presentation, but it is also very, very scary. A minor little tactic that I mean, you guys probably know this as well, but you know how there's so many links and you're not sure? Hovering over and look at what that domain is. So if it's insert random country, then you know that that's something that's dodgy. Just hover.
And I think what we do at Eftsure, and I'm mindful of not scaring everyone, I do think for every AI for bad application, there'll be one for good. And, I think there's a duality to the world that continues. But you've really got to trust less. There's no, I don't click on things unless I absolutely am certain of them. I tend to rely, and most of us at Eftsure, what we've been trained to do is we rely less on incoming information. You can, if someone phones you from your bank, if someone phones you from an organization, ask them to prove their credentials. You can always, and I'm going over, Adriana, but I was phoned by my bank, which is Macquarie, to do something. And what I did was, it sounded a bit off. It turned out it was a legitimate thing, but I independently called Macquarie. I asked this person for an employee number or some further form of identification. I then went online, got Macquarie's phone number, and then I phoned. And, is it a bit ridiculous? Is it a bit like overkill? Yes, but I'll tell everyone, yesterday I spoke at a Westpac event in Brisbane, and someone put up their hand saying their parents had lost $1 million. Their elderly parents had lost their life savings through one of these, an email-related scam. I mean, it is devastating. I was at another event where someone said 40 regional farmers in Victoria had been taken by a scam because obviously someone had got into a supplier email and mailed all their customers. So yes, I'm not being alarmist in saying how prevalent these things are, but just you can control a lot of the risk by just being a lot more vigilant. So
Great.
Thanks very much.
Closing remarks, Gavin. Absolutely. All right, everyone. That brings us to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got about an hour's break or so, and then we'll be jumping back on. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.